So this morning, a new trailer dropped for the movie coming out in September called Megalopolis. Now, it's interesting that the first full trailer comes out so soon before the release because that is very rare. But the whole story of this movie is to me more interesting than anything. This is one of those situations where the behind the scenes is really interesting, and I'll talk about some of that here. So the movie stars Adam Driver and Giancarlo Esposito, and it's written and directed by the legendary filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola, he's sort of the star of the movie without really being the star of the movie because of this whole story with this movie. So the movie's about this architect who can control time, and he wants to create this perfect utopia, but there's a clash with the mayor, and that's played by Giancarlo Esposito, presumably. And then the film sort of goes from there. Now, the movie was screened at film festivals, and I've avoided spoilers, so I don't know what the outcome is. The only thing I know about this movie, as far as the plot goes, is what I just told you, and the fact that it's got a lot of great actors, ones who haven't worked with Coppola either ever in years, and the backstory, the fact that the apparently it was split among the people at the film festivals. Some people liked it, some people didn't. It's one of those visionary films, one of those movies that you don't really know how the public's going to take to it because it is a kind of a weird movie. It's a very different movie. A lot of Coppola's storytelling is done visually. And, the big story is that this movie was self-funded. So Coppola's always had financial troubles, needless to say. He a lot of times was making movies to make money for studios when he went over budget or to film it to help his own company. That's why Godfather 3 was even like a thing. He did a lot of movies for paychecks. And he's always been the kind of guy who struggled to work in the studio system because they oftentimes meddle with his work. Now, the reason why this movie has a chance, first of all, Lionsgate is distributing the film, so they're not creating it. Coppola put $120 million into this movie. Coppola had ran several wine vineyards. He opened up a company that produced wine and made a ton of money. So apparently he sold off the majority of the company and was able to raise $120 million to self-fund the movie himself. That is kind of a big deal because that's very rare. That is very, very rare. Filmmakers who can't find budgets either have to figure out ways to work within the budget of a movie or they have to self-fund. And very few people self-fund. In fact, movies are expensive, so very few directors ever really have the capital to do it, but apparently Coppola's wine vineyards did really well for him. Now, he's an old guy. He's in his 80s. So it's safe to assume he's not going to be around in 20 years. I don't want to say that. I'm not trying to say that I want him gone. Obviously not. But he's winding down, and he's also a guy who his kids are probably good to go. So he probably says, let me get this movie done before I die. This feels like sort of his last passion project. And he's kind of like George Lucas. If you go back and watch that Charlie Rose interview from 2015, he talks about how he hates the studio system, which is why when guys like Doomcock were saying he was coming back to Lucasfilm, I was screaming it was bullshit, which, by the way, who was right? Because George Lucas would never work for Disney. George Lucas will never work for a studio system, especially one like Disney, the way it's ran. He just won't. He'll sell everything off and do something on his own before he'll work within the system because he's had problems working within the system. Not just because they try to control him and control filmmakers. I mean, look at the movies we've seen, like Madam Web, like stuff like that you can tell the studio kind of meandered in. But also, they try to tell the filmmaker, the director, the writer, which way to take the story, what to put in it. they put their politics in, and so it prevents somebody from having complete creative control. With Coppola, he wanted to have complete creative control. With this movie, the reason why it's so interesting is because he's been wanting to make this movie since I think he wrote like a draft in like the early 80s, right? But he's never known if he's ever going to make it. It's been sort of his passion project, his big desire that he's wanted to make going on decades. I mean, I remember hearing that even Lawrence Fishburne heard a story that he was talking about it on the set of Apocalypse Now. That's how long ago it was. So this has been a project of his, and I've heard him talk about this actually. I never thought he would ever make the movie because maybe it would be, too expensive or he would get too old, and both of those things were kind of true. I don't know about him being too old. I'm not him, but I mean, he was already an older guy in the 2000s. I mean, he's, like I say, he's in his 80s now. And most directors kind of wind down around that time. Not everyone, but, we kind of want to rest. But it's an interesting story because apparently there were table reads for this movie done as early as 2001. And there was a script, like a finalized script back then that was read by people like Kevin Spacey and even the late James Gandolfini. Before, the Sopranos actor legitimately passed away in real life, he was booked to be in this movie, or at least Coppola wanted him to be. And I mentioned Spacey because, this is obviously before he got canceled. That's how long ago this was, right? So they were supposed to be presumably the two leads, but instead now we have Adam Driver and Giancarlo Esposito, who are very good actors in their own right. I mean, you're getting good stuff there. But the movie didn't get made because apparently when 9/11 happened, it threw a monkey wrench into everything. So this has been not just years, decades in the making. And when you see a guy who has as much experience as Coppola, who's been doing movies his whole life, want to create something like this, it does make you wonder. Remember how Lucas said in the interview with Charlie Rose, George Lucas said that if he ever makes a movie again, it'll be small films that he's going to make for himself and his friends, like tone poems. This movie's kind of got that vibe where Coppola's not trying to make this movie to appease a bunch of studio heads. He wants to make this movie for the craft of filmmaking because he has a message. He has a message in this movie, whatever that may be. Now, the problem with movies like this is that these types of movies oftentimes don't perform well because, unfortunately, wide audiences are accustomed to having things kind of spoon-fed to them. They're accustomed to kind of seeing the same thing over and over again. But there's a couple of things that have sort of changed the industry in the past year that gives, I think, filmmakers like Coppola hope that he might make his money back. Remember, $120 million of his own money went into this. So he would have to make presumably more than that to make a profit, right? Not including whatever else is going on. He has to pay Lionsgate, whatever, right? Maybe he already paid them. He's going to have to make some money. And it might not seem like a lot, but remember, it's one man versus a whole company. It's a lot of money for one guy. So Coppola was apparently very loose making this movie. Like, he let the actors ad-lib and actually made changes to the script while on the set, which pissed off a lot of the crew. There's like a whole lot of interesting backstory here with this film, like I said. And even though I still want to go see it because I want to judge for myself, obviously, even though I'm going to see this movie, and there's the truth, like, I'm going to see this movie and I'm going to tell myself as I'm watching it, I'm going to say, okay, would I feel the same about this movie if it was a different director? So I have to take that into account because The big thing about this movie that has me interested is more so, first of all, I like the idea of like a time controlling architect, even though I think a lot of people would do something else if they can control time, something much more dastardly, or maybe even save the world. It is an interesting idea, and I'm wondering about how his powers are limited. Like, it's definitely a step in the direction of science fiction, which is not something Coppola has done throughout, like, he's not famous for it. But one of the things I love about this trailer is that in the trailer they actually show all the negative reviews for some of his most beloved movies, like The Godfather 1 and 2, Apocalypse Now, Dracula. Like, they talk about, like, oh, the critics said this about the movie, but they turn out to be classic. Is this going to be a movie that when it comes out, like, most people just crap all over it? They just shit all over it. But then, like, maybe years pass and like people look at it again and say, that wasn't so bad. He was onto something. That could be. That happens with a lot of movies, man. That happens with a lot of films. You know? So with Godfather, I mean, it won Academy Awards for the year it was nominated. I mean, it wasn't like some of the critics crapped on it, but the Academy didn't. And this movie, I mean, this is coming in right in time for Oscar season. I mean, we got a couple more months left, but still plenty of time. Releasing a film later in the year tends to be a good idea if you want it to be nominated for an Oscar, because of the fact that, the critics have that recency bias. Not the critics, the Academy. But my question is, what I was trying to say was, if this backstory of this movie being made wasn't so interesting, would I be going to go see it? Maybe. I mean, the trailer, I think, was interesting enough. And having Lawrence Fishburne do the narration was genius because he has a great voice. And it's got that, like, Dark City Matrix kind of vibe to it, with Morpheus's voice. Also Larry Fishburne, of course. Like, that same vibe of, like, this movie's different. And the reason, and this goes back to a point I was saying earlier, the reason why Coppola actually, there is hope that the movie will do good, is because of a little movie called Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer being put out at the time that it was, I think, was important based on what was going on with real world events, with all the different wars going on right now in the world. But it's also a movie that was made off the popularity and respect of the filmmaker. And it was made, it's a film that's not a superhero movie, not a franchise movie, not a big budget spectacle, even though it had a decent budget. It wasn't like a Marvel movie. Not part of a series. It's a standalone movie, and it made a ton of money and brought a bunch of people out to the movie theater. So because of that film, I think that changed things. I think that film really is allowing new types of movies to be made. And I think that people who have been maybe tired of the MCU or Star Wars or all this kind of same Mick Hollywood crap, maybe they're gonna go check this out. I just hope it's good. I mean, like I said, Coppola's old as hell, and I can't imagine him sitting in the director's chair as comfortable as it was when he was in his 20s. Same thing with editing the movie. I mean, this took a while. But I look forward to it. I mean, there's just so many there's so many actors. James Remar's in this movie, right? He's in this movie. Aubrey Plaza's in this movie. Shia LaBeouf is in the movie. Jon Voight, Talia Shire, of course. Of course, she's gonna be in it. And so is Dustin Hoffman. So I think I'll give it a chance. Will you? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know how much of this information you knew, because I just recently found a lot of this out, and I just find it interesting only because a lot of people were like, wait a minute, Coppola's still alive? Like, some folks didn't even know that he helped supervise that Godfather 4K release that came out, a year ago. He's on there. He's literally on that, like, on the intro to the restored 4K, like, introducing the movie. He seems to be a healthy guy, Hopefully he will be around for much longer. It just tells me though that this probably is going to be his last movie, maybe ever, because if it does well, he would make his money back. If it doesn't do well, it might make him feel bad, but then it could be a thing where maybe years after he passes, maybe then it'll be, you know, respected. I don't know. Anyways, I'm out.